Everything. As we jump in, I can see the levels going up and down, which means we're live with Robbie Nicol. Robbie, hello, sir. How are you doing today?
Hello. I'm doing well. I'm doing okay.
Yeah.
You know?
Things rocking and
Getting through.
rolling?
Getting by. As good as anyone can be doing in 2020. Yeah.
You're in Auckland. I'm in Dunedin. Auckland's going well at the moment. No, even though there's a few of those community cases going around, nothing's been said about going into a level 2 or anything. Or am I that so far removed from the news these days that something has happened? I don't even know. Can't tell.
If you've missed it, I've also missed it. And it's worse for me. It's worse for me to have missed it because I am in Auckland. No, everything's pretty chill. Compulsory face masks on public transport is the only significant thing that happened recently.
Does it impact you at all? Are you a face mask guy or a public transport person, or are you a vehicle person?
I am a public transport boy, which is, not always easy in Auckland. But, it's okay. I have a few fun face masks that I like. Try to make them match the outfit, all the important things.
Is that the face mask version of the what is it? The curtains match the drapes. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Like
Something like that.
I'll tell you something. I wasn't going to. This has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but just speaking of where we live, I just put this on my Instagram. I'll read this out to you, and others can see it. But you can go to my own Instagram if you want to see it. It says this, dudes. One of the things I put I live about living in Dunedin. It's supposed to be I love. Dudes, one of the things...
This is what happens. You immediately spot a typo.
I know.
You look at anything that's published.
Dudes, one of the things I love about living in Dunedin is that Central Otago is just a couple of hours drive. This is a shot of just somewhere we stopped for a red light yesterday. Not even a place to stop and take a pretty picture. I'm literally just waiting for the light to change from red to green. This is how gorgeous it is. And it finishes with, suck on it everywhere else in New Zealand. So there you go. There's my little addition to...
Absolutely. Fair enough. If you got it, flaunt it. Why not?
Did some Trade Me shopping yesterday and had to shoot up to Roxburgh and Wanaka to pick up some items that we got off Trade Me. So that was the day yesterday of driving through Central.
Was it worth it? You happy with what you got?
Yeah. Very much so. Although the woman that I bought the chair off was a complete bitch and wouldn't let us use her toilet after an hour and a half drive. But that's okay. Got a good price, so that's all that matters. Hey, dude, you're probably, I don't know, if I was going to say you're best known, maybe not best known now because Citizens Handbook's doing so well, but certainly broke pretty massively, I would think that would be fair to say, amongst the New Zealand the New Zealand scale of views on the internet. I mean, the big thing overseas gets millions of views. New Zealand, tens of thousands is pretty massive.
The New Zealand level, yeah.
But still, proportionally it was huge. The white man behind the desk thing. Tell me about that process. When I saw it coming out, of course, I'd thought of things like, a Daily Show with Jon Stewart and that sort of vibe. But tell me about the startup of White Man Behind the Desk, where it came from, and what got you into it.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely Jon Stewart's doing. There's no doubt about that. I was a pretty big fan of the Daily Show as a teenager. Trying to find, it wherever I could, it wasn't always the easiest thing to find. There was like a global edition or something that they used to play
on CNN
late at night.
That was on CNN once a week. Yeah.
And the global edition was rubbish. Just like, I didn't understand why they couldn't just have the normal version. There was no audience for, anyway. But so I love Jon Stewart. And then I was lucky enough to get involved there's a group of filmmakers in Wellington who were called the Candle Wasters, and they were making fictional web series based on Shakespeare plays, basically. And they invited me to, help out with one of their web series, and they were doing extremely well, getting heaps and heaps of views, and they were my age or younger, and they were making stuff. And it sort of just seemed like, it's kind of possible to just sort of start making things and putting them out on the internet. So then Sally and Elsie Bollinger were two of the Candle Wasters, and I said, hey, would you help me make this thing? I just want to sit behind a desk in my bedroom and talk about politics. And they were like, yeah, let's do that. And then Sally and Elsie's mum was smart enough, we sort of thought, I'll just like put it out for like some of my friends and try and get some feedback. And Sally and Elsie's mum said, no, you got to put it out as though you think it's good. You got to stand behind it and put it out into the world and be like, no, this is a proper thing that you should watch. And so luckily we did that. And then it did quite well. And people just kept watching it. And then, 2 episodes in, Russell Brown invited me to do media take and flew me up to Auckland to talk about it. And it was all very exciting for me, and to feel like, oh, maybe this is a feasible thing to do. Maybe it's possible. And then I've sort of just tried to stay alive and pay rent while continuing to do it. And that's where I am now.
Looking on the YouTube channel, have you retired it? It looks like the last one was about 12 months ago, unless I've missed some more recently. But is White Man Behind the Desk now retired because you've moved on to Citizens Handbook, or what?
Sort of. I mean, I think it's retired for the foreseeable future as far as I know, but I wouldn't rule out bringing it back or, doing another thing. I think, it's basically doing it for free is quite hard. We got a Patreon and that thing, which sort of helps you continue and helps you keep going. And we're very grateful to those people who put their money where their mouth is and support the channel. But it is quite tricky sort of financially. And so that's why things like the Citizens Handbook, which is a sort of a spin-off, I guess. It's a thing where we can go, hey, RNZ, this seems like it's kind of in your wheelhouse. Would you want to make this with us? And they very kindly said yes.
Because that gives you access to ends on and air funding. And whilst I'm talking, the reason I'm being rude and not looking at the screen is I will very quickly bring up for people to see an example of the Citizens Handbook. I think this is off your Twitter. We give it some volume as well. So people who are watching will see it. People who are listening will see a little bit. Here we go.
Hi, I'm Robbie. Minister, if I could just...
No, not you.
Why? Oh, bye-bye. Lots of camera angles.
Potatoes.
The potatoes?
So you say it's a bit of a spin-off, right? Meaning, I'm assuming that it's a similar vibe to what you were doing. It's sort of an educational thing, informing people about what's going on. But now there's a bit of ends on air funding and I don't want to say structure. That implies you weren't structured last time, but kind of, but more an organisation behind it to push it through.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think, there were sort of 2 things that we knew we wanted to do with it. One was we wanted to do sketches at the top, which me and the person who I write everything with now, Phineas Teppert, we just wanted to write different kinds of comedy, basically. And also sort of thought those would be short videos that we could kind of share around and get some traction so that people would be like, what's this thing? And what's this from? And I like that sketch, but I don't know what it came from. So we wanted to do different kinds of comedy. So sketch is a fun, different thing from rants,
Yep.
10-minute monologues.
Yep.
And then the other thing that we knew is that we kind of wanted it to be, it's more sort of overtly educational, I guess. It's White Man Behind a Desk is more of an opinion piece, and the Citizens Handbook, there's not very much opinion in it. It's basically just going, here's how New Zealand came to be New Zealand. And obviously there's, lots of big choices that you have to make in terms of what you put in there. And that's all editorializing. But my opinion doesn't color it nearly as much, which I think, that's also part of the pitch to RNZ as well is, hey, this is good for anyone and everyone who might want to know how New Zealand works.
Yeah, but that idea of this is their sketches, kind of versus commentary. Obviously, you can achieve the same with both of them. I mean, you have a very good episode where you do a Dragon's Den, and it's James Cook. For people who haven't seen it, it's James Cook trying to sell the concept of what New Zealand is today to the panel as if they were Māori chiefs from 200 years ago, and basically they're like, no sale. It's very, very funny, but within that sketch it does exactly what a commentary would do in a more entertaining way.
Yeah, totally. And I think, I mean, that sketch, I think that was pretty late in the process that we came up with that sketch. And I think kind of the realization was, as we were doing the research and as we were figuring out what the series was going to be about, and that first episode is about, New Zealand before colonization. And I think there's kind of, typically, when we talk about the history of New Zealand, or at least the history of New Zealand that I was taught, there's kind of like, things were kind of happening in New Zealand. And then civilization arrived in 1840. And, that's just not true. So I think we kind of immediately wanted to subvert that kind of core fallacy that still lingers, that there wasn't civilization before then. There was. It was just different.
Yeah, so for people who haven't seen the skit, one of the things that Captain Cook offers our Māori representatives is, how about civilization? And they kind of go, yeah, bro, we've already got that here. So
we do have that.
Yeah, it's very good. It's very, very good, by the way. Like as in looking at it kind of, sometimes, I mean, you'll get this, when you're involved in sort of either the media or the digital media or a creative process, you watch something that someone else does and you go, fuck me, that's a good one. And that is a good one. It's a really good one.
Truly the highest praise. Truly the highest praise. I totally know what you mean.
I wouldn't go that far. Truly the highest praise, but yeah, it's a good one.
I totally know what you mean. Yeah. I feel like, and I also feel like the more that we do this, and the more, I don't know, the more I work in this industry, the more it's kind of like, you realize how hard it is to make something that's pretty good, and the more you kind of look at stuff, and basically, if you're just like, yeah, all right, then that's like great. You passed that threshold. It's not cringe-inducing. It's not, you're not trying to turn away. You're not sort of going, oh, we've got to support it because it's New Zealand. You're like, no, I actually like it. Yeah. And I feel like that's actually a pretty high bar. That's the first bar we're trying to.
It's like the opposite of the Christian music model. I know that there are people who participate in the Christian music model, and there are people who buy the Christian music model, but they're prepared to put up with a lesser quality product because they think the content is so important, where I've always have been of the opinion that actually your quality of your content and the quality of your production, no matter what you're doing, actually needs to match. And we don't live in a day. I mean, look at, I've said this before about, what we're working with here in the studio is probably a $500,000 studio from the 1970s with the kind of stuff we can put out, the production quality, I mean. And there's no excuse these days to put out low quality production values, in my opinion, unless you are literally I have an iPhone to record my podcast and nothing else. But the entry point is so much reduced today compared to what it has been in the past.
That's totally true. But at the same time, I also think there's a real, like if you're on YouTube now, you are competing with NBC, you are competing with CBS. And so that is the kind of flip side of that, I think, as well, is that the standard is so high. When we were making these sketches, I think that's also a thing as well. There is also sometimes an attitude from funding bodies that like comedy is cheaper somehow to make than drama. I don't know. Our producer always made the joke that like, I don't know if they think that there's like the lighting truck comes up and they're like, do you want the comedy lights or do you want the drama lights? Because obviously the comedy lights are much cheaper. It costs a lot. And when you're going up on YouTube, you are competing with Key and Peele and Stephen Colbert. And like, those people are just a click away and cost the exact same amount of money as you do. And so you have to try and hope that you provide something that is good enough to sit alongside those people.
Well, ultimately, still the old adage of content is king. I mean, even though I'm saying the production values matter, still what's going to get eyeballs is the actual quality of the content, not the quality of the production. All I'm just saying is that in this day and age, the quality of the production is not that hard to hit. A 4K, stereo recorded well way. It's not difficult. So people should at least, first of all, achieve that, and then, work with their content to actually then compete. I mean, I remember I was working with a trust in East Auckland, and we produced a program for News Talk ZB. It was a 1 hour radio show, and we reimagined it was a talkback station on the year 0. And it was sort of on the day and in the time that the that the baby in the manger story was being told. And so we were getting these call-ins from people talking about the lights in the sky, and other people like, where the fuck are all these shepherds from? And all this kind of stuff going on. We recorded that in a literal blanket fort. We had blankets for sound and in an office, and competed with and beat places like BBC and CNN and stuff in New York Radio Awards. So that proved that the content was better, more valuable to that position than the production values. Although in saying that, when you're working in audio only, it's pretty easy to match quality, because if you've got a good mic and you can have some blankets up, you're pretty much there.
Yeah, and I suppose we've noticed that with COVID, right, is that a lot of people making audio content who used to be going into fancy studios are now in their cupboard, now in their wardrobe, surrounded by clothes, and it's fine. It's not been a significant difference. The podcasting industry, still great.
Yeah, and it's true. And I think what you're finding is more people are getting little USB mics, and then when they're doing, CNN kind of started it maybe 5 years ago when they all of a sudden started talking to people via Skype. And the whole world kind of went, oh, hang on, this is not broadcast quality.
Is that okay?
Yeah, but they sort of allowed us to do it. And then when COVID kicked in, of course, Zoom, as we're on today, became sort of a broadcast standard. So I was like,
that's been really interesting as well. I wonder how long that'll last. But it does feel that, because as you say, that production is kind of the first hurdle, right? Like, I don't want to watch something if it looks bad or sounds bad. And once you overcome that hurdle, then as you say, the content has to be good.
Yeah.
But I won't even click on it if the production quality's bad. But then I wonder if, that initial hurdle seems to be sort of going down. I feel like I'm more willing to click on something that looks bad these days, just because of COVID, just because I've gotten used to the fact that there's good stuff that's filmed on people's phones in their house.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's probably, I might sound a bit contrarian right now or contradicting myself. I don't think I am, but I'd rather watch The Godfather on a VHS than some terrible 8K, and I like Marvel movies, but I'm not referencing Marvel when I say this, but some terrible 8K space thing that has all the special effects but has zero storyline. So that totally. I guess what we're saying is you need to have a foot in both camps, but at the moment it's not hard to at least get your production values to where they can compete.
Yeah, and also think creatively. If you can't do something, work within your bounds.
Yeah.
If you could just get if you can get a friend who's got like a half decent camera, just use that one shot. Try it. That's what we did. It was just me sitting in front of a camera and talking.
Yeah.
And that's sort of as easy as it gets, filmmaking.
Yeah. Hey, you're talking about doing White Man Behind the Desk for free. I'd be interested to get your position and your take on this world of sort of independent content creators, independent podcasters, internationally. Let me put it this way. If you were in America and you put out White Man Behind the Desk, and it got proportionally the same uptake, which is, let's say, 60 times the size of New Zealand, because how big as America is to us, you'd be monetized overnight, making screeds of cash. No question. It doesn't seem to have quite happened in New Zealand, even proportionally, to be able to do that. And it seems we're going through a period at the moment, and I don't know your story entirely, but when I hear you talking, I'm kind of thinking there's a duality or a juxtaposition between ownership and income. I don't know if it is this way. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe you owned, as in your ownership of White Man Behind the Desk was wholeheartedly, but it wasn't making you the income. So you've now gone with RNZ producing this other thing. But I'm assuming that do they own the Citizens Handbook, or do you own it in part with them? How does that work? But you're getting an income from it. So how do you toss that up in this day and age between complete creative control and ownership versus potentially not owning it, other people having your ideas but getting an income from it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think I've been listening to Duncan Greaves' The Fold recently, and they're talking a lot about media and media funding models. And his interview with, what's his name? Cameron, can't remember his surname, who's the CEO of NZ On Air.
Oh, I'm out of that. I'm out of that zone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting, and I think the main thing that I've found in terms of that public funding is that it has moved quite slowly in terms of keeping up with the changing landscape, and which is why, as a result, we have to team up with a platform partner. That's just
preach it, brother. Preach it, brother. Let me hear it. Hallelujah. Preach it, brother. I'm sorry. I mean, like, this is a woe is me thing. I don't care. I've got other irons in the fire.
Yeah.
This is the 144th episode we've done of this. Probably 250 hours of local content. And NZ On Air tells us, well, if you hook up with MediaWorks, we might be able to figure something out. And I'm just like, fuck, you guys don't understand the media world at the moment. It's like the independents out there should be able to find and seek access if that's the way it needs to go in a smaller market. So go,
I just think
preach it, brother.
The things that should be taken into account are reach and the content and whether it serves the mandate that NZ On Air wants to achieve. In my opinion, White Man Minded did that. It
totally.
was
100%.
Educational, political, informative. It was entertaining. It reached young New Zealanders, and got them interested in politics. So it felt like we were doing that. But
yeah, hey, look, just pause for a sec. And I'm not trying to blow smoke up your ass. White Man Behind the Desk in America would have got a Peabody. That's what it does. It's about educating people, and that's exactly what you're doing. I 100% agree with you, bro.
So then, because of the restrictions placed on the funding that comes from New Zealand On Air, individuals can't access that funding. They have to team up with an established platform. And there were reasons historically for that, but in the internet age, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And I think now there is more talk of, hey, we should actually be following the talent, not the platform, because also the platform's changing all the time. We don't know what's going to happen to Facebook tomorrow, and we don't know, when TikTok's going to crash or blow up or be the only place that anybody ever goes. The people who do keep on top of that are creators and are the people who, put stuff out into the world. They can be moving and following that around all the time.
Yeah.
So if we fund the creatives rather than funding these big organizations that, a lot of the time, my experience with RNZ has been absolutely wonderful. But, a lot of the time, you're the small cog down the side of, some big business.
Yeah.
And, the level of investment and concern in your project is a lot smaller than your own personal level of concern and investment in your project. And I think also, like, you can't access money for marketing, which, again, used to make more sense in the era of radio and TV, because people just had the radio on, or people just turned on the TV and there it was. But with the internet, it's a lot more like films, where you have to convince people, you have to tell them that it exists, because they don't know that it exists and they're not going to stumble across it. And then you have to convince them to make the effort to go find it and watch it. And that's a lot more like marketing a film than it is marketing a TV show. But you can't access marketing budget for that. In fact, the platform is expected to put marketing budget up for it, but they don't want to do that, because why would they? So in the end, it just means none of our content really gets marketed or advertised. And so very few people see it.
I kind of also wonder.
Great system.
Well, no, but I also wonder as well. I mean, the thing that confuses me a little bit, and I another hat that I wear is I work with businesses in Dunedin on their media marketing and advertising. That's something I do on the side. And one of the things I've realised is that businesses in New Zealand haven't yet learned of the benefit of getting on board with independent broadcasters and publishers of content. And if you look at all the research offshore, all the research says, that people are 7 times more likely to buy off a podcaster than they are off a radio advert, for example. So if you get a podcast like the breakfast shows here in Dunedin, the breakfast radio shows have, let's say, between 7 and 10,000 listeners. It's not difficult to get a podcast of that kind of number. It costs the business less to advertise on the podcast, and they'd be more effective. But there's a gap in the knowledge, and the problem is that gap in the knowledge feels insurmountable. So I hear what you're saying about New Zealand On Air, but I'm working on something at the moment. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I'll tell you about it next week, probably.
Yeah, great.
That I kind of go. And the problem is the big media outlets have a vested interest in not educating the business world about this, because that will just drive more advertising away from them. So there's a way that the businesses of New Zealand need to be educated. Look what's happening offshore. Look at the model that the Rogans and the Two Bears One Cave and that the Mark Marons and those guys are setting up. Yeah. Why do you think they're making so much money? It's because that's an effective form of advertising. And
so and you actually listen to the ads, right?
Yeah,
because it's someone that you have that parasocial relationship with. You value their opinion, you trust it to some extent that they've filtered out some of the crappier things, depending on who it is, and like I listen to a podcast called My Brother and Me, and there'll be good jokes in the bit in the middle where they are advertising their products. So I don't skip the ads because I don't want to miss the content. I want to hear them tell jokes. That's why I'm listening to the podcast. And so I know these brands very intimately, and I think about them all the time. And absolutely,
MeUndies.
The odds of me actually MeUndies, exactly. Harry's razors. These are the
Dollar Shave Club.
Exactly. We know them, It becomes a joke, about, what was it? The cereal one? What was the one that they had in cereal? It was like,
I don't know.
They couldn't say the word. I can't remember. But they couldn't say the word, and everybody referenced it all the time. Yeah. People don't do that for radio ads as much, as far as I'm aware.
Well, and the other thing is, and this is not like a beat up on the media. This is one of the things I did want to talk to you about was this, because you seem to have had sort of both a foot in both of recent times, a foot in both camps. You've got this independent thing that you did back then, up to a year ago, and then you've moved into the RNZ stuff, which has funded that. But I think here in New Zealand we're missing, and I know we're smaller. And I know that our market is smaller. Like I remember when I was working on ZB as a mid-dawn host, per capita, my audience was bigger than Bill O'Reilly's, but it was still a very small audience. It was 100,000 people or whatever it was. But done well, I really hope and desire that we can get the marketing, PR, that audience. Yeah. Like, no, I won't say who I've missed out on this week because I'm talking to someone associated with them later on. So I won't say that. But it's like at the moment it's still considered a bit lesser. And I think people are missing the idea that actually the plethora of brilliant, and when I say podcasters, I'm actually talking about independent podcasters doing it themselves, because there are groups who are formed into groups of 6 or 8 or 10 that are that the media scope is missing out on, the business scope is missing out on the opportunity, and on some level maybe the audience is missing out on. But I guess that's the rub, isn't it? If the audience was 200,000, then the business would find them. But yeah,
it's tricky as well. I mean, it's like Jon Stewart never had that high ratings. It was always a couple of million or whatever, which is pretty small for America, but his cultural influence was enormous. And I think it's like John Oliver at HBO, it's like he becomes an important mascot for the HBO brand and says something about what HBO stands for. Obviously he gets millions and millions of views on YouTube as well, but it's worth it to have, even if you don't have quite that level of reach, you can still have that cultural influence, and obviously everybody who does political satire now is like used to work on the Daily Show, so it's almost all the evening hosts. It's amazing, eh?
Hey, what about your white man behind the desk? Was there any necessity for you to give that up to do RNZ? Like, was there any agreement that, hey, Robbie, you can't do both? You got to give because we're paying you. You got to give us the time and the focus? Was there any conflict there at all? Or did you just go, I don't have time now to do it, so that was really the deciding factor?
Yeah. I mean, it was just workload, really. No requirement that I couldn't do that. And I think, to RNZ's credit, I think they would recognize that would be good for them.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, if I'm putting out more content and I'm getting more traction and getting more views and bringing more eyeballs to this kind of political satire brand, then I think that would help. And also, they've totally been very happy to let me put all of the content out on my platforms as well as on their platforms, which is, I think, one of the benefits of them being a public broadcaster is that their goal is to get it in front of as many eyes as possible, rather than to monopolize the content.
So it seems what New Zealand's model at the moment is, and maybe you're an example of this, maybe, is that find success, get an audience, be bought into a mainstream media group. Whereas it seems that the model overseas is find success, get an audience, tell mainstream to fuck off, and clip the ticket yourself. Do you reckon that's just because of our size, that with certain we've only got a limited number of ears and eyes in New Zealand, so it can't happen any other way? Or do you think there at some stage will be a shift?
I'm not sure, because I think even in the US, it's still both. Do you know what I mean? Like, lots of people start a web series or whatever, Broad City, will start a web series, and then the goal long term is, I hope to work for Comedy Central and I can make a full half-hour sitcom.
Yeah.
And that's the route they take. And then there are, like the Mark Marons or whatever, who will go off and say, no, I think I can totally do this myself. But I think, there's obviously strength in numbers, and having big established organizations who know how to do stuff and have that connection with, big audiences is very helpful. But I do think, I think it's pretty tough in New Zealand to be totally independent.
I think there's a strange juxtaposition though as well, where, and I know, there are several of us sort of, and I guess I'm one of them, but I'm not trying to beat my own kind of case here. I'm just talking about the general and
scheme. Your experience. That means that you know what's going on.
Well, but also I'm connected with quite a few other independent podcasters. We kind of talk and stay connected. The difference as well about the independent guys out there is often, like, you talk about money going to, and I won't say RNZ because this is not a bad thing, but I'm like, $100,000 or something going into, let's say, MediaWorks or NZME or Stuff or Rover or something like that. There are a lot of hands out that take from that $100,000.
Yeah.
20 grand going to me.
Yeah.
Would pay for pretty much everything I needed to pay for the whole year, other than maybe my time. But that would make $100,000 to me would be like, fuck, I'm living like royalty. There's 2 years worth of podcasting. And I had a conversation once with because I'm not trying to say that I haven't attempted to also connect with mainstream markets, but I had a conversation with a newspaper once, and I asked them how much they pay their journalists, and it was like, 60 or 70K. And what do they produce for you? And it's like, 4 to 7 articles, 4 to 10 articles a week sort of thing. And I went, okay, cool. I've got an idea for you, or I'll give you 25 items a week, 25 items of video, newsworthy video a week. Give me $100,000. And they just couldn't get their head around it. I'm like, well, it seems like a no-brainer. You fund my studio $100,000 and we'll deliver you 25 pieces of newsworthy commentary content a week. Couldn't figure it out. Couldn't get their heads around it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is like, it's risk aversion as well, isn't it? I mean, it's the if I give a bunch of money to MediaWorks, nobody's going to afterwards say that was a reckless and stupid decision. The public's not going to be up in arms at the broadcasting minister who allowed that deal to go through, and what's going on at New Zealand On Air, that they're giving money to MediaWorks and then they make kind of an average show that not many people watched. It's like, that's fine, that mistake, whereas, I gave $100,000 to this 24-year-old dude who's making a political satire web series, and he scarpered off or whatever. It's like, you
He went-
idiots!
he
How
went-
dare
he went
you
to-
make?
He went to Fiji and had a great time.
Yeah, exactly. Of course he did. Why would you trust this person? But you know, those are good risks because, you know, because what we should be looking at is the body of work and the reach it gets.
Well,
And
there's also
that's really
there's
all
also,
that should matter.
there's also a middle ground. I mean, I'm not saying this is going to happen, and I guess we're just kind of spitballing now. But imagine if the government said next financial year we're putting $1 million aside. We want to find, I don't care, 50 independent broadcasters, and give them 20 grand each, and just go do what you're going to do, or 20 independent broadcasters, give them 50 grand each. You know, it's a risk, but to be honest, for 100 grand, if one or two of them come out of that with some, you know, wicked content and storytelling, it's worth the risk, and see, it's a low risk, potential very high reward return.
Yeah, totally.
Won't
happen,
but it's a nice idea.
Oh, it absolutely won't happen. But I do think, absolutely. I do think that these conversations are happening at New Zealand On Air for the first time, because there's been a bit of a change in management there, which is good. It's sort of maybe a dozen years too late, but it's still good. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, just, I mean, like, having worked with the Candle Wasters, who were, you know, making great content. I think the other thing that happens as well is sometimes you team up with a big organization, or you team up with a big organization and you get more money, and there's an expectation that you make a different kind of content. You know, the content that the Candle Wasters were making initially was all vlog style. So it was all kind of pretend as if these people actually were running YouTube channels and they were real people, they weren't characters, and they were vlogging, and the story would unfold through these characters, and you would go, oh, I see, it's all scripted. This is actually, but it works perfectly for YouTube, right? Like, people will watch that on YouTube because it's a vlog, but it's not a vlog, it's narrative, but it perfectly matches the form, and it's exactly what you want when you go to YouTube. It's exactly the kind of content you want. You feel very connected to the people saying it. It's perfect YouTube content. And then when you get a bunch of money and you team up with an organization, there's sort of an expectation of, oh, you should make like a TV show now, or like you should be making short films or whatever. And then that's great, and it's helpful to advance your career and to learn new skills. But also, that's not super YouTubey. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's what you want to watch on Netflix or on TVNZ On Demand. It's not what you want to watch on YouTube. It feels wrong. It's in the wrong place. And so I think there can be a problem there of, teaming up with old school organizations, which kind of pull you in an old school direction, rather than directly funding independents who know their format, who know what people want on YouTube or TikTok or Instagram or whatever it is.
Yeah, and then there's also then potential hurdles when you get on board with a big company. And I mean, it wasn't that we got on board with them, but I mean, I remember working for ZB when all the Tony Veach stuff came out, and we were told, do not talk about this. Biggest news story of the day, then Radio Live, doing it 24/7, and we weren't. I was in the studio. I was coming on after the person who was on air. When the call came through, they said, okay, you can talk about it now. So there was actually that as well. I've talked to a couple of mainstream outlets, and I've said to them straight away, one of my big concerns is if that we were to work together, like, I'm not saying who it was, doesn't matter. Let's say it was MediaWorks, that you wouldn't allow me to, or you'd try and stop me from interviewing all the guys from NZME. Or if it was, Rover, you'd stop me talking to all the guys from TVNZ. I'm not prepared to do that, So unless you understand that I have full creative control, then we might as well just stop talking, because it doesn't work.
Dumb, right? Like, collaborations help everyone.
Yeah.
Rising tide raises all ships. It's if you go on their show and they go on your, it all helps, actually.
Well, let's look at the
American.
That's what
Competitive attitude is.
What does America do? What's Letterman on CBS, and he's forever talking to people from HBO or ABC
of course. Yeah, because it's good for his show.
Yeah,
and it's good for him.
Yeah,
but you want the best people. You want your show to be a good thing to listen to, to watch.
Yeah, whereas in New Zealand,
YouTube is the classic place for that. You know, it's like that's how everybody gets views, is they collaborate with another channel. And so that's interesting as well, that, like, in order to get funding for the Citizens Handbook, like, we have to put our content onto the RNZ YouTube channel, which is kind of like, I don't know, it feels anathema to you as a YouTuber. You're like, oh, why do I have to help my competitor? You know, like why do I have to fund this other YouTube channel?
So,
well,
so do you own it? Do you personally own it, or does RNZ own it?
Kevin and Co owns it with us, the producers of it, is my understanding.
So, because I saw a tweet the other day talking about, I think you said, I don't know if it was the other day, what, being on TV3 and no, I'm not getting any money for this?
Yes. Kevin and Co, yeah, is my understanding, basically is losing money very generously to help support us to try and get out there. And it is that thing of, you know, constantly trying to play the long game of, hey, you know, well, that means we got way more eyeballs on our content, which means that we can then go to NZ On Air and say, look at the return on investment you got.
Yeah.
We managed to get it in front of this many people online, and also we were on TV3, and also building that relationship with TV3.
Yep.
But, you know, it's not ideal.
It is interesting thinking about a return on investment from a government agency that is banked on, like, think about RNZ is banked on their outside kind of the commercial. You know, I was talking to a mate yesterday saying my friends who have moved from like ZB to RNZ or from TV3 to TVNZ, they're kind of sitting on a gold mine at the moment because it's government money. And I know it's not quite as black and white as that, but they don't have the same pressure to have a commercial return because it's government funded. So I find it fascinating that one of the ways a government entity can help fund is by looking at your commercial return. It seems to be a bit of a, well, I wouldn't say hypocrisy, but certainly a juxtaposition if nothing else.
I mean, you know, it makes sense to me that people have to see it, right?
Of course.
Like, you know, there's no point in making something that nobody sees. You might as well have not made it. So, I mean, I think absolutely count should be very high in the priorities. And I think that's fine. I don't know. To me, that seems kind of fine that, you know, the public funder would be concerned about whether or not people saw it.
I still think this is the place for a TVNZ7. You know, that actually,
right.
We're only talking purely from television there though, which actually almost throws out the window the number of eyeballs on it and just thinks about what would be good for this country to have. I still think one of the ways to help all media at the moment is for TVNZ1 to go fully non-commercial, funded like the BBC, and then straight away what that does is it limits the number of opportunities for advertisers, which means they'll all more go to Prime, TV3, TV2, which means that'll actually help them survive. And if TVNZ did go that model of BBC, TVNZ1, Channel 1, did go that model, then you could have these kinds of questions about, you know, what do we want? What we can represent everybody here. We can just represent people, and even if the numbers are small, we could do it for the greater good, to coin a hot fuzz phrase, the greater good.
The greater good.
Yeah. You know what? And I think maybe, unfortunately, TVNZ in particular, having kind of a foot in both camps, where the government hands them a shit ton of money and then they give them a dividend back, muddies the waters a bit. And like, it's worked for a long time, but what was it? 18 months ago, they said don't expect a profit in the foreseeable future. Then just go BBC, TV1, drive all your advertising to TV2, and then see how that works for the other media agencies, because we need them. We can't be left with just TVNZ. You know, we want TV3, we want Prime, we want those other ones in there as well. But I don't know, again, maybe that'll never happen.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, the TVNZ RNZ merger thing, I haven't heard many people explain why that's a good idea. I don't know. Chris Farfoy seems very keen on it. Seems to be a real idea that this government seems to be very on board with, but I personally don't really get it.
I mean, thinking about the BBC, I can see the model that they've used.
I mean, that's who they're trying to emulate, right? Yeah.
But the thing is, if they're going to emulate them, fucking emulate them. Don't have a foot in both camps. I mean, I can understand. I mean, it happened at MediaWorks, and perhaps it wasn't particularly successful, moving to the news hub. So you moved away from sort of the radio newsroom and the TV newsroom, one newsroom, which sort of makes sense. I mean, I'd be interested to see if there's any research about, is it as effective having one sort of conglomeration of journalists as opposed to two specialist groups? And then I guess the research would have to show, and where is that cost effective? But I don't know. I mean, I think if they're going to do it, they've got to do it properly. That's what I'd come back to. And what that means is, to me, a proper, for real public broadcaster, probably also a music public broadcaster that's maybe a little bit newer than Concert FM, and go down that line of actually going, let's do this properly and let's fund this properly.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what they choose to do.
Yeah.
It might be nothing.
Hey, I follow your Twitter.
Yes.
And you talk quite a lot
Dangerous.
on Twitter about housing and housing prices and, you know, affording houses and that kind of stuff. I also, obviously, through this conversation, people already know you and they know that you're interested in the political world through your commentary and through what you're doing. Well, tell me your thoughts around the housing market at the moment. Tell me, obviously, you're now in Auckland, as you said, you were in Wellington. Obviously, Auckland is, I think now, I read the other day that the overall, all of Auckland region, average house prices now are over $1 million. There used to be suburbs within, but I think now Auckland in general is over $1 million.
Come on, New Zealand.
Well, you know, move to Dunedin, bro. although I tell you what, I mean, it's not the same as Auckland, but
I suppose the problem is people are moving to Dunedin.
Well, it's not even
up the prices there.
It's not even so much that. I work with one of my clients. I've got a couple of real estate agents who are clients, and they say because the housing stock is low at the moment, that's also driving the house prices up. So they said the other day that there's often, it was a few months ago, there's often 1,000 houses on the market at the time we were talking, and at that time there was 250. So when you've got a quarter of the houses on the market, the demand for each house is so much higher. That's also driving the house prices up. And even though people from Auckland will hear Dunedin prices and scoff, you know, the house I'm in at the moment, which I've owned for 4 years, it hasn't doubled in price, but it's probably gone up by, I'm just trying to in my head work it up, 80%. So it's gone in like 3 or 4 years. So for people in Dunedin, I came down from Auckland, so I'm one of those wankers. But for people in Dunedin, house prices in Dunedin have skyrocketed as well. So it's not just Auckland, it's also proportional and, you know, and everyone's sort of feeling it. Give me your thoughts on the housing market and what you're seeing and looking at the moment.
I feel like I've recently confused myself a little bit by sort of complicating things. And I keep asking on Twitter for people to explain it to me. The problem is people have different opinions, and they all seem very confident that their opinion is the obvious and simple solution. You know, fundamentally, it does seem to be a supply issue, so we just need more houses, and that would be great. You know, I don't fully understand. I was reading an article today about why Kiwi Build failed so catastrophically, and I still don't fully understand why that did so badly. I guess there are multiple reasons, many factors, that it was a disaster. But basically, we just need more houses, right? And that would be ideal. But I mean, how do we do that?
I think that's the answer. Well, that's obviously how you do is you build them. I think that's the answer because
why couldn't we last time? Why didn't Kiwi Build work?
I haven't looked that deeply into it, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Because I'm a fuckwit who owns a house, so I'm fine, bro. Don't worry about me.
You don't have to worry about it. You want the prices to go up. That's great.
But I would think straight away the truth is if a government says we're going to build 100,000 houses, the question is how. Like, how many builders does that require? How many builders have you secured? How many building companies have you got come on board? Because remember, they're all busy at the moment. You know, they've already got 3 houses booked up for the next, 1.5 years that they're already building. You know how hard it is. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But most people know how hard it is to get a builder to come around and check on your house. So not only do we need more houses, but we need more builders. And then you come down to these ideas of where do we get those builders from? And at the moment, I guess under COVID, you can't import them. But if you do import them, do they have to be retrained to our standards, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? But I'll give you something that I always think is a little bit naive from lots of people. You know, people just throwing out their house prices have to go down. This is ridiculous. We can't do that. I've always said, and I used to say this as a talkback host as well. So for the last 12 months, people have been buying houses. If you want to rip 30% out of the market and they've got 5% equity in their house, you're bankrupting them all. That's something that has to be a part of this equation as well. You know, if all these house prices drop straight away, then there's a bunch of people who are actually going to be bankrupted by that because they don't have 20% or 30% equity in their house. Now, I'm not saying that to kind of go, so fucking deal with it and we'll just keep house prices going up.
They should always go up forevermore.
I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying that's a part of the conversation as well, and no one ever addresses that.
Yeah, I mean, I think also people don't want to talk about the fact that a lot of people don't want house prices to go down, you know, and that's a huge factor, is that actually any solution is not in the interest of a very hefty voting bloc who always turns out at the ballot and loves to have their opinions heard at, you know, local government meetings. And they absolutely don't want house prices to go down. And so any solution is ruled out by those people, or there's some sort of justification for why, oh, well, actually, I think the zoning rules shouldn't change in this area because, you know, heritage or, you know, some obscure value. And you're like, well, people need places to live, actually. There's actually quite a lot of people homeless, and there's quite a lot of people who are aware that they'll have to rent for the rest of their lives, and they're giving away, you know, 60-70% of their income to a landlord so that they can buy another property. And that's not a great system, and we do need to fix it.
So a couple of things on that, right? There's a couple of things that I would think straight away. And obviously this is coming from a privileged position, right? Because I own a property. But just one, so I'm not a wanker. So
just one that you live in, and you live in that property,
and it's in Dunedin, and I'm in it right now. I'm working in it and living in it. So, you know.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that is the point of houses. So I think you're actually doing what we all should be doing.
I actually wonder if there's a whole cultural change needs to come. Now, I've had this conversation with people who are from Europe, and people in Spain that I've spoken to about this go, we don't have an expectation of ever buying a house. The expectation in our culture is we'll rent our whole lives. That could be a mind shift that would change how people felt about housing in New Zealand. And maybe the government getting involved in fixing up the rental market with that cultural shift might be a way of doing it. I don't know. The other thing,
I think also, like, I
was just going to say the other thing I think is apartments. And I think Auckland is probably getting there, but we're such a culture of, you know, a white picket fence and quarter acre block and a dog and 2.4 kids. But I think that's a solution. It's a lot quicker to build, 300 apartments than it is to build 300 houses. But the problem is they have to be decent apartments. Like I've seen what sells in Auckland for 34 square meters. I wouldn't live in it. But if it was 60 or 70 or 80 square meters, my first house was, 75 square meter, 3-bedroom house in West Auckland. You know, if it was an apartment that was 60 or 70 square meters and 3 bedrooms and it was, $500,000 rather than 1.1 million, there's other ways.
And like most renters are also all crammed into like one little house with, 10 other people anyway. So it's like the idea that because we're building houses that are big, that people are living in these expansive, lovely environments, it's just ludicrous. Like an apartment, if you could have if an apartment was affordable and you could live in one by yourself, then that would be so much more space for each person. But I definitely think, I don't know, if we do manage to build a shit ton of houses and prices start to come down and we start to realize that, we should make other investments because it's kind of weird that that's the one investment we encourage everybody to make, and therefore nothing bad can ever happen to the housing market, even as we let the rest of our economy crumble. Even if that happens, people of my generation, there's a decent chance that those benefits won't kick in for a while, and we still will be renting for the rest of our lives. So I absolutely think a huge part of this conversation should be, hey, a lot of people are going to rent forever. Let's make that a nice experience. Let's give them a sense of ownership over their property. Because I think the horrible thing is the transience, right? It's that feeling of, well, it's not really your house. You're here for a year and then you might get kicked out at the end of that year, or you're not allowed to paint anything or alter anything. Like you're talking about those people like in Germany, you're renting for your whole life, but it feels like your house.
Totally. 100%.
And that's the big difference, right? Is a feeling of ownership. And this is my community. And, oh, I can raise my kids in that school. And I'm not worried I'm going to have to pull them out of school in that because we have to move because the landlord said.
And that's why I say maybe if the government addressed the rental market and things like you're talking about, like the right to lease rather than the right for the landlord to boot you out. Now, I'm not. It's not as black and white as I just stated it. And I think giving all the power to the tenant then just reverses people thinking the landlords have all the power, but working it to figure out. I'll tell you something else, and I have to tell you something that in my opinion, this Labor government has got 3 years to do what they want, right? I don't think anybody would suggest that in 3 years from now they'll get a majority government again. I think this is a COVID election, so they've got 3 years, and to be sitting there saying they won't do a capital gains tax, I think is just, we need, to lose the referendum on cannabis, that's $500 million a year of tax that's just hasn't been injected into our community. Capital gains tax,
gangs instead.
But here, you're a famous dude. You can start working this line for me, and with all your
great
with all your they them friends at RNZ for me. Capital gains tax. Capital gains tax.
Non-binary pals.
Capital gains tax is easy. It's an easy solution, right? The reason boomers put their money into property is because governments up until KiwiSaver were not looking after them when it comes to their retirement, right? And the government basically said, look after yourselves. And so there's this whole generation who have gone, fine, I'll buy properties and then I'll be able to use it when I retire. So it's very simple. Houses purchased after KiwiSaver became a thing are subject to capital gains tax. Houses that were purchased before KiwiSaver became a thing, doesn't matter if you own 5 or 50 of them, they are not, they will not get capital gains tax on them, because the government can't say on one hand, we're going to do, not that they actively see this, but they can't on one hand look after our retired people poorly and have them go look after themselves, and then when they've done that, say to them later, well, now we're looking after you well, we're going to take that off you. So I reckon just make a line of demarcation. When KiwiSaver came into account, houses purchased after that, capital gains tax on the whatever it is, second house and on. Houses purchased before that, not under it. Simple, done.
I have not heard that before, and I simply have no take on it, Pat. I'm gonna leave that. I'm gonna leave that out in the ether. I don't know. Is that going to be really hard to sell to people? Maybe.
Don't know, but look, I think it's fairly obvious. My parents were like that. My parents didn't own a lot of houses, but my dad's he was a bit of a wheeler dealer and bought and sold properties, and it was always a part of, 4-hour retirement. They had a batch in North.
Totally.
Had a batch in Northland, and that's because there wasn't a good system set up for their retirement. Now that there is a system set up called KiwiSaver, people don't need to be driven to the real estate market for their retirement. So
and because of the tax system, right, that was just like the one smart investment.
Yeah.
So it's just the one that everybody did.
Yeah. And
so it's like,
and if you've got, and if
we do need to change it for the future, right? So that now when people are making these decisions, they go, well, housing's one investment, but it's not the only one.
Yeah.
That's the ideal system that we want to happen in the future. That is not happening now. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it's, I know I'm sounding really arrogant saying this, but I think it's a really easy solve. I think a lot of the times when people kind of go, especially politicians go, whoop, no, and they play the pandering game. I've said for a long time, you have to, whether you like them or hate them, you have to admire people like Sue Bradford, who never wavered from their beliefs,
Yeah.
Whether you agree or disagree, they didn't waver. And in my opinion, you have to not admire people like John Key, who got it on a populist vote, by keeping in place things like interest-free student loans and working for families that I benefited from. So I'm happy they stayed in, but I knew that wasn't a national policy. They were just doing it to pander. And so I think about Labor now, whether you like them or not, they are the party of capital gains tax. They are the party of, of legalizing cannabis, them and the Greens together. And if they don't do that, whether I agree or disagree with their policies, I will respect them far less.
I completely agree. And I feel like Jacinda Ardern is shaping up to be quite John Key-ish in terms of policy choices. And I think, we were already seeing that in the first term, but then obviously COVID and
Oh my goodness, I think we're working. Hang on. Come on. Talk to me, Robbie.
Hello, I'm here.
Fuck me. My sincerest apologies. I think
It's not going.
I've got a laptop which is my separate broadcast. So I can show you this. We can do this. So this is sort of my setup at the moment.
Gotcha.
And there are, when I talk about wearing another hat, that literally is the other hats are over there. So, and I think the broadcast call had a spares. I think it cut out. So, look,
Giving up.
I know that you are a busy man, far busier than I. I'm in my pajamas in my house. But I'd love to finish the last kind of 5 or 10 minutes of this conversation. And then for people who haven't seen this live, I'll stitch them together and turn it into one. But we were talking about Jacinda, and we were talking about I for me personally, I find it more, I respect someone more if they stand by really what they believe, even if I agree with them or disagree with them or not, right? And you were just saying before the thing had a spares that Jacinda was maybe in danger of becoming a John Key. The floor is yours, sir.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking, I read a quote from Jacinda in a Henry Cook opinion piece, and the quote was that she always campaigns as if she's 3 points down. And I was like, that is a wild decision to me. That you, surely the whole point is that you build up enough popularity that you can lead people, and that you can say, here's something that I think is valuable. You trust and like me, so let's together get this done. Rather than always acting as though you're not winning, you're not that popular, and always trying to say what people want to hear. That just seemed to me like a recipe for inaction.
A recipe for mediocrity. Sounds like what it is.
Yeah, right? Surely. Of risk aversion and sort of weak milquetoast decisions. So anyway, I hope to be proven wrong. I'll be thrilled if Jacinda Ardern turns it around and completely fixes the housing crisis and ends inequality in New Zealand. No more poverty by the end of the term. Great.
Do you know what I've just realised?
What?
It's fucking deep state, bro. They were listening. And you said something.
They wanted me to stop.
You said something. It wasn't negative, but it was questioning Jacinda. And then our stream got crashed.
All of a sudden, hey,
So Trump is right. It's the deep state.
Well, wow. Did not expect this conversation to end with the conclusion that Trump was right. That is unexpected, Certainly not where I thought this was going.
Hey, tell me real quick, and I know it's time for us to head off shortly, but I was interested because you do tweet about it a fair bit, and I'm not sure whether it's personal things you're going through or just an awareness of other people going through it. But you talk a bit about anxiety on your Twitter feed and stuff. Is that something that personally is something that impacts you? And how does that work with someone who is such an up the front sort of, literally has to put themselves in front of an audience to hear this? Anxiety must just be... It's like I remember John Kerwin saying he dropped the ball in a test match once and had a panic attack on the field.
Yeah, well, I certainly can't imagine that pressure. I don't know. It's interesting. Yeah, I do I struggle with anxiety. I've got anxiety disorder and I take meds for it. I take escitalopram, which helps. And it's interesting being someone who likes to be on stage and likes people looking at me and laughing and I like performing. But I think there's kind of a weird thing about anxiety, or at least my kind of anxiety, that I sort of always feel like everybody's watching me and judging my every move and being extremely judgmental and paying a huge amount of attention. That's not true. That's my anxiety speaking. Nobody really gives a shit about anyone. But when you're performing on stage, that anxiety, that feeling that everybody's looking at you and watching your every move and is paying a huge amount of attention, that's true. Yeah. So in a way, I think like there's something about having anxiety that sort of means that you've been training and practicing for being on stage your whole life, because you act like you're on stage all the time. And I get hugely nervous before shows and before performances. But once I'm on stage, I don't feel that nervous because I don't know, in a way, it makes the world more like how I perceive it in my day-to-day life. It makes that delusion true.
Wow.
That people are paying a huge amount of attention to me in that moment when I'm on stage in that hour. And I think, I don't know, I really love performing on stage. And for that reason, I think. But yeah, sometimes it's horrible. Sometimes anxiety is just the worst, and it just feels like a horrible, gnawing anguish in my chest that I just really wish would go away.
I believe you reference it as a rat trying to gnaw its way out of your chest, didn't you?
That is absolutely how it sometimes feels.
Yeah.
On a bad day, it does just feel like a physical pain. You know, I remember my first panic attack, and I absolutely had no idea what was happening. And it does feel kind of like you're having a heart attack, or like you do feel like my vision went all blurry and kind of closed, and I couldn't really move, and was just like, well, I don't know what's happening, but I don't like it. So it can be pretty full on. But then also I think, you know, it reminds me of Stephen Fry did a documentary on bipolar disorder one time, and he met with a bunch of people who have bipolar, and he asked them, if you could press a button and you wouldn't have bipolar disorder anymore, it would magically vanish, would you press the button? And everybody said no.
Wow.
Because they all wanted to be them.
Right.
You know, they all, and that was an integral part of who they are.
So them with bipolar was their authentic them. If they didn't have the bipolar, it wouldn't be them.
Yeah, it's like it's fundamentally a part of who you are, right? I think, you know, that's the thing about, you know, mental illness or mental disorder, is that it's inextricably linked to all elements of your personality. Certainly I'm working on managing my anxiety better, and, you know, having strategies to get through the day, and so that it doesn't interfere with my life, and so that I can live the life that I want to live. But also part of anxiety means that, you know, I've got a really good sense of how people are going to respond to a monologue, or, you know, how to perform a certain way, or, you know, I'm thinking a lot about how all the different members of an audience are going to respond to something, and I can guess what the criticisms are going to be before they happen. And that's very helpful in my work. It can be difficult in my life, but, you know, it's all sort of part and parcel. And so I think, you know, it's hard and it's a struggle, but hopefully for people out there who deal with anxiety, they're also like, yeah, but it also kind of makes me special and gives me some extra skills that I'm kind of stoked to have.
It's your superpower.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. I also, it's interesting talking to performers about this. I don't ever say that I had anxiety or had a mental health disorder, but I certainly went through something when I was working, realizing that the applause became what I was trying to attain, rather than the applause being a byproduct. And even when working in radio, you don't literally hear the applause, but you get radio ratings, which is basically a variance of applause. When you're on stage, working with Theatre Sports Auckland or whatever, you get applause. When you're working in a, so I realized that at some point it was something I had to get the hurdle over and change my mindset on, that if I didn't get the applause, I was doing something wrong, which then flowed into, if I didn't get the applause in my personal life, positive reinforcement from people telling me I was great, that kind of stuff, it didn't feel right. And I had to do a whole mind shift change of making the applause be the byproduct of what I do, not the focus of what I do. And look, I don't know what that, I was ever diagnosed with anything or whatever, but there was certainly something in my brain going on, which I needed to kind of change. And I think as performers, we have quite a different response to a bunch of these things that maybe people who aren't used to being in front of, I've emceed in front of 30,000 people, at a music festival sort of thing, that they just don't get. If I'd have gone out there and there wasn't a scream and an applause, I would have felt like it was a failure, rather than most people going, holy shit, that sounds like so much fun just being there. So yeah.
I mean, I think in a way people have more understanding of it now, because we're all on social media and we all want the likes and the clicks. So there's a sense of the addictiveness of approval from your peers. You know, obviously social media, their whole business model is the fact that it's addictive to get approval from your peers. And that's definitely true when you go out on stage and you want that positive feedback. I definitely found it became really valuable for me to do live shows because the response in the room is a really nice response, whereas just watching numbers tick up or not, as the case sometimes is a different kind of feedback that is a lot more kind of stark and depressing and anxiety inducing.
True, and actually, because actually in that room as well are people who want to see you, so automatically you've got a different audience.
They paid to be there, right? They're already bought in. They're part of the enthusiasm. I think the other thing is, you know, that byproduct thing. I think that's also why it's so nice to have great collaborators. You know, like when we did the live show, that was when we brought in, you know, Phineas Tepper as a co-writer and then Stella Reid as a director. And that team, the process of making it became so fun. And we were so excited by what we were making and we thought it was funny. And so then the little bit where you actually perform the show is just one small part of the whole journey, of the whole process of creating the thing and making something that you're proud of. And if you can, as you say, make the applause just a byproduct of that fun experience and that fun journey, then that's a much healthier way to be, for sure.
But look, something else I think is really important. I'm on a bit of a bent on this at the moment, and that's, you know, we all heard from the government this year about being kind to one another. I had an experience, and I've explained this story once on the podcast before, so if people have heard this, switch off now. That's fine. I don't care.
Bye.
Bye. So yeah, thanks for joining us for our 2-part documentary series. Is that I was at my daughter's, she's last year at primary school. I was at her school show, and they did like a part of it. It was a review of the year, and there was a kid playing Jacinda, and they had the noise from the night that we went into level 4, right? And the voiceover from that night. This is a level 4 as of 11:59 p.m. tonight, and I had a visceral reaction. I won't say panic attack and I won't say PTSD, but there was something in me that went.
Body chemistry changed.
It was like whatever the appropriate version of my sphincter tightened, but like you know, it was I sat there and went, holy shit, there is something about this year that I haven't dealt with. There is something about this year that actually has got really deep inside me, and I need to acknowledge that I'm not okay, and I'm not okay, not like on a, you know, serious suicidal or whatever way, but there's something that I'm not okay, and I haven't dealt with it. And that was the point where I started this kind of little movement I'm talking to myself about, which I have a plan of starting to talk to others about shortly. I've got something in the back of my mind about being kind to yourself and celebrating your successes this year. My house is not in as good a condition, tidy-wise, as I would like it to be. I haven't achieved a bunch of stuff that I would have planned to have achieved this year, but there's other things, like I had a studio in Central Dunedin, and during COVID I built it at home. I built a studio this year. You know, I've done 75 or 80 podcasts this year. So what I think we all need to do this year, in my humble opinion, is celebrate our successes, even if those successes are smaller than perhaps they would have been in a normal year, and be kind to ourselves, because this has been a cunt of a year. And I think that if everyone was honest, in fact, I've told this story to 4 or 5 people, and all of them have said, when I hear that noise, I clench. This year has got into us in a way that I don't think many of us are acknowledging yet. And, you know, when people go through an experience and they do suffer to the extreme of a PTSD sort of thing, they need time to get over that. And I think that we need to acknowledge as a society, we've been through something. We've been through our 1918 influenza thing. We've been through, perhaps for most people in the world, well, not most, because there's some, you know, war-torn places, but for some people in the world, what is their version of World War II this year? And the thing is, it's not finished. This is another 12 months of this. And I'm going to be banging on about this for a while, because I've got a couple of ideas coming up as to how to do this in a more official capacity, but we need to be kind to each other. We need to be kind, more importantly, to ourselves. and we need to celebrate our successes, no matter how small they are. One small success, in my opinion, is worth 20 failures this year because of the year it's been.
I completely agree. I do think, it's in our blood, isn't it? That it's seeped in, the realization of how fragile it all is, how vulnerable we are, and how all of the systems, could crumble at any time. So that's scary, and it's full on, and we're getting through it still.
Hey, Robbie Nicol, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today.
My pleasure, Pat.
I'm very sorry about the hiccup in the middle there. God knows. I'm going to stick with Deep State. They're the ones that jumped in. Because
it's easier, and it's not our fault then.
No.
Then we didn't do anything wrong.
I didn't push any buttons. Now, Citizen Handbook, best place to find that, because everyone should check it out. No question. Best place to find that would be where?
Best place to find that, in my opinion, is youtube.com/whitemanbehindthedesk, because that's me.
Hang on.
But it's also on rnz.co.nz if you click on podcasts and series.
There you go. Let's bring this up. There you go. This is your page here. And also the good thing about if you go onto that and you haven't yet, for some reason, you're not au fait with White Man Behind the Desk. There's the start of that.
In the past.
That's all you in the past. We are time We are time traveling right now. So youtube.com/white man behind a desk. Did you ever have any pushback about the whole, white man? Oh, you and your fucking patriarchy. Or was it always, because obviously the joke is
sometimes
there's so many white men behind the desk, I'm just another one. But did you ever have any kind of people missing the joke and giving you pushback?
I think that the only time it ever happened was from like white people who were like, don't tell them
that you're a white man. Yeah, you should keep that to yourself.
Yeah. We don't want to draw attention to the fact that all of these people behind desks on TV are white guys. Then we might have more representation in the media. What a terrible thing that would be. So I think on the whole, people, I think, got it. Sometimes I've been like, oh, was that maybe a good call? But it's fine.
I think you should definitely bring it back. I think echoing the conversations that we started with here today, I think you should definitely keep it going, and I think you should definitely keep ownership, because then when there is the breakthrough that comes, you won't be doing it for free. And it's mostly importantly incredibly entertaining and funny, but also I think an important educational tool for people. I remember, look, we're wrapping up now, but I remember you said you like Jon Stewart talking to Al Gore. And Jon Stewart was in his thing. He was in front of Al Gore, and he was like, Jon Stewart was going, why are we the only ones saying this? Why aren't the news agencies saying this? Why aren't they pointing at what we're pointing out? And without hesitation, Al Gore looked at Jon Stewart and said, because the only people in medieval time that could tell the truth to the king without fear of their heads getting cut off were the jesters. The jesters telling the truth are really important, and that's why I encourage you to keep creating what you're doing on your own, keep collaborating with RNZ, whatever you're doing, but our jesters are so important in helping us tell the truth.
Cheers, Pat. Thank you.
Hey, Robbie, all the best, mate. Nice to meet you.
It's a pleasure.